I'm Debbie Travis.
And I'm Tommy Smythe.
And this is Trust Me, I'm a Decorator.
Debbie, how are you? How was your summer?
My summer was epic, I have to say. I want to take you back to school.
I don't want to go back to school, so I'd rather you didn't.
I just thought they won't let you or me back in, but anyway.
Oh my God, no.
So what you call high school and we call kind of upper school, on the first day, and I don't know if you did this in school, but we were told to write a story that night for our homework on the first day of school about our summer, what we did in the summer. Did you learn something new?
Yeah.
Did you make new friends? You know, whatever you did in the summer. And when I started thinking about this, I kind of got the shivers because I remember writing an essay. I got an A+, and the teacher reading it out, saying she was going to read it out in front of the class. And I knew the minute she said this, I was doomed.
What do you mean doomed?
She read what I wrote, which was, I spent the summer with my ponies and my horses. And I talked about how I taught myself to stand on the, like a circus person on the back of a horse.
Debbie, you did not do that. It's a work of fiction.
Of course, it was a bloody work of fiction. And then, of course, I lived in a suburban house in Blackburn, Lancashire. Anyway, but then there's always that split second in your life that is a life-changing thing. And at the end, she said, Debbie, that was absolutely a wonderful story. Is it true?
Whoa. In front of the class? She said this?
I was in front of the class. She wasn't telling me off. I could have said, no, my summer was really boring, so I had to make this up. Or I said what I said. Yes. And I lived with that until I left high school. So I was frightened to bring friends home.
You mean for the lack of ponies?
Well, I didn't have any. We didn't even have a dog. And
you didn't even have a large dog.
I remember at some school event, another woman saying to my mother, I think you're wonderful being able to get here in the morning with the girls, after milking the cows. And my mum looking at, and then I get thumped on the back of the head. But the thing is, I lived with that lie. And I think so many of us do that, because you can't go back, and it was that second of her saying, because she knew this teacher, and she was helping me get out of it. If I'd have said, no, I was just writing a story, would have been fine. But I did all the farm animals. I did everything. And we lived in a 3-bedroom house, in Lancashire. So that was my shame. So every time somebody says, what did you do for the summer? I'm thinking, don't make it up. Just, please learn to behave. And it was years before I dare invite. I was always friendly with the new girl because then I could bring her back.
She hadn't heard the story or the rumors.
Yeah, she didn't say, where are your ponies? So did you have a good summer, Tommy Smythe?
I did, but I want to go back to your story because I think there's something really interesting and telling about that. Because, as a gay man growing up in the 80s, or at least coming of age in the 1980s and early 90s, at a time where, it was still a time when gay men left small towns and came to big cities to reinvent themselves. And I met so many men who were older than I or contemporaries of mine when I was young, living in Toronto in the city or being in New York or being in London during those decades, whose entire lives were total artifice. Their name was changed, their background was invented, their careers were fake it till you make it, and they all made it based on lies. And there was this element of it that was, I think, forgiven in the sense that I think everyone fantasizes about, could I have a completely different life that I invent for myself? And it's so interesting that at a really young age, you kind of thought, well, this isn't the life I want. I'm just going to write the life I do want and be the person that I do want to be. And then, of course, later in life, you've gone on to do fulfill all of your dreams. Whenever you dreamt of something, you said, this is what I'm going to do. And then you did it.
So they all changed their names. They changed their names. Huh?
Many changed their names. They would have really clunky last names and then they would change them but it was a very interesting generation of people who just sort of said, I reject the life that I've come from. It's not what I want for myself. I'm going to go somewhere where I can have the life that I want. And I will be a person completely of my own invention. And there's something that I learned was quite valid about that. It's not to be looked down upon, I don't think. I think the reason that people relate to it so much is because it's a fantasy that lots of people have, which is, what if I could just go somewhere where nobody knows me and become a totally different person and reject everything that I've left behind and just only look forward as this new invention of a being. And I think that's really compelling. So it's interesting to me, my friend, my old friend, that you did that at a young age.
I think it's also a different time now. First of all, they don't leave home anymore. They can't afford it.
Mm,
And secondly, when I moved to London from the north of England, which for me was just ordinary life, family life,
mhm.
you could be anybody you wanted. And,
Yeah,
we came up with these stories, just
sure.
our London life, and
Yeah.
made it more exotic than it probably was. And it was also a way of, we'd pick up guys so we could get into clubs and things like
Yeah.
this. And you could make out whoever you were,
Yeah.
and put on accents and things like this. I mean, I remember people saying to me, and who are you today? I'm Lady Cathaida, whatever. But I think, yeah, you're right. It's kind of a wonderful thing. It's a fantasy.
Yes.
But as a child, it's when you're small, you're so frightened of being humiliated and made to feel little. And I also did that because at the time, my father had probably just died then, and
Mhm.
I had to change my name, which it took me a couple of years because I was adopted then. And that was a very, very difficult thing. And the teachers were a little bit crueler
Mhm.
or unaccepting as they are today. And they would say things like, "I'm sorry, what's your name this week?" Because maybe on the register you still had
Wow.
your name. But I actually was the last in the family to do it because I was the oldest, and I just didn't want to change my name. I really didn't, because it was the end of my dad. And I remember my mum saying, "You're going to be the only one with a different name." Now it means nothing because, wherever you
What
get
was the
married.
name, out of curiosity? I'm sure our listeners are wondering what the name was.
You promise not to laugh.
I promise.
Okay. So I'm quite tall, right?
Yes.
I was certainly the tallest girl. I've shrunk over the years, but I was the tallest girl in my class. So my last name was Short. So that was another thing to be very embarrassed about. Stop it, Tommy. Stop it. I was Debbie Short, little Debbie Short. And
Not
so,
laughing over here.
Debbie Short's painted house wouldn't have sounded quite as exotic. But yeah, so I was a Short, which is actually Scottish, I think.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I'm not going to change it back. But it was a very hard thing, and I had to legally change my name. And then, of course, I didn't change my name when I got married, and my children have, which is very common, of course, today, have my husband's name, and
Yes.
I have my name. So I mean, in the old days, you used to have to take a letter on a plane to say that they're your kids.
You're like Elizabeth Taylor. The next time I'm angry with you, I'm going to say, Deborah Short Travis Rosenstein. Get over here.
Exactly. But yeah, so yeah, I think you're absolutely right. People do have their own personas, and I think sometimes you believe them, and it's this whole trend today about manifesting something.
Mhm.
And at first, you think this manifesting thing's a bit ridiculous. But if you want to be a certain type of person, and I
Yes.
know they use this a lot in trauma. We're not talking about summer holidays at all now, but when people are going
We'll
through
get to that.
when people are going through grief and a hard time or traumatic time, we know somebody very well who's gone through this, and she decided, I don't want to be known for that. I don't want to be known as the widow or the woman who this happened to, or the woman.
Yes.
So you manifest, who do you want to be known as? Somebody
Sure.
very happy and positive, and isn't she? And so
Mhm.
you start to say, well, okay, I have to be that person, and it's literally a proper exercise.
And it's who you present to the world. Yes.
Positivity and negativity. It is, I think we're all born negative. And I quite like being negative at times. I think it's funnier than being over slimy positive. But at the same time, positivity gets you through the day more.
Of course.
Negativity I find is a quick rush. It's an endorphin rush. It's when people are mean on social media, they're getting a quick rush by being
Mhm.
nasty. Whereas positivity is something that stays around you. You know, if you can
Mhm.
wake up in the morning and say, I'm happy, I'm grateful, it's going to be a great day, even if it's not, you say, well, tomorrow's going to be a better day. It's a really hard thing to do. It sounds in all the books and all the advice, like, yeah, everybody just be positive. It's actually extremely difficult, but it becomes second nature. And
Sure.
it's like we had a lot of people talking about sugar today, with two diabetics here. And they were talking about sugar and how already they're feeling good here because there's not sugar in everything.
Right. It's not added to absolutely every single thing
No,
that
and
you
that within
consume. Yeah.
48 hours, both women have said that I can't believe, and their levels have gone down. I don't really understand it, but to go off sugar, which I did many, many years ago, it's a job, it's an exercise, you have to force yourself, and it takes about 3 weeks. So I think it must be the same with who you want to be. Try it for 3 weeks. Say, I'm not going to be that miserable old sod who's very sad because this
Hmm.
happened. I'm going to be happy and helpful and planning and have purpose and whatever. And you work at it.
You do. And I think that like that kind of manifestation, when you decide to be the person that you want to be, in the practice of doing that, which is a practice, it is a rhythm that you have to achieve and that you have to maintain, you do become that person. All of these
Absolutely.
people that I talked about earlier in this conversation who were inventions of their own, who were
Mm,
people who had reinvented themselves to become something that they more wanted to be than who they were in the past.
mm,
They were very authentically and genuinely those people. Sure, they had a name that was invented, but their practice of being a human being in the world was their intended practice. It was who they intended for themselves to be. And I think very few people, really go about the work of examining what your intentions are. And a lot of life coaches and people who talk about, motivational speaking and things really often visit this notion of intention and stating your intentions to yourself and then practicing those intentions in daily life. So it's something, as you said, something that people have been doing for generations, but we're naming it now.
one of the ways to do that is to emulate. So I often say to people, well, who would you like to be? Who inspires you? Who
Hmm.
we all have friends or people in the media or something like that. And you go, God, I'd love to be like that person, not just have their job or their
Hmm.
husband. You think, I want to be a Mal because I want to have George Clooney. God, didn't she look amazing at the Venice Field? Oh
Oh
my
my
God.
gosh, yes.
You can emulate people, and children do that.
They do. Yes, of course, they parrot,
Dogs do that. They emulate their owners.
mimicking.
They say you start looking like your dog, you start acting like your dog. There is no doubt in my mind that your animals and your children, your children may not be quite so happy about it, but as a very early age, they're emulating. You see their expressions. We all
Yes.
say, I'm not going to be my mother, but sadly, a lot of it is any habits that they had that they maybe inherited from a parent.
Hmm.
I really think it's a chain.
I remember my grandmother, I was in a beautiful restaurant once with my grandmother, just the two of us. And I was talking away and I was telling her a story and she sat back like this and looked like she'd seen a ghost. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Nothing's the matter. It's just that you made an expression that your grandfather made with your face that was so exactly him that it took my breath away for a second." And he was a person who I never really knew. He died when I was 1 year old.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't have, developmentally as I was growing older, pick this up from him because he simply wasn't there. And of course, this wasn't at a time when we had video films and things of people. So he was very much a ghost, to
Oh,
me.
without a doubt.
And speaking of my grandmother, I will tell you, you were asking me what I did this summer. I spent more time in my childhood summer place this summer than I have in my entire adult life.
Wow.
And so I grew up going to Muskoka, which is a resort area in a lake district in Northern Ontario, for anybody who doesn't know about it. It's very famous.
Quite partially.
Well, it's very posh and very famous now because it was discovered by Hollywood celebrities and billionaires. And now it's much, much different than it was when I grew up. But then elements of it are very much the same. And my family's lived in different pockets of that part of the world for 3 generations. And so we're one of the older families there. We have generationally seen the changes that have happened over the years. When we started there, certainly it was not posh. There were very few cottages on the lake. There were, if a boat went by, my mother would look out the window and say, "Oh, there's Pam. I wonder if she's going to turn in." And now it's like the highway. There's so many boats, and they're bigger boats and they're louder boats and things, but still you are by the water and you're in nature. And I posted something on Instagram while I was there this summer, and I'll read it to you. It was something that I wrote on my birthday that was about my life there. So July 11th, 1970, I was brought to the Muskoka Lakes at 7 days old on July 17th. My young, beautiful, loving parents placed me in an antique dough box and then into a long and low 1927 32-foot Minette Shields launch called the Marmelwood. I was the first of many cousins to be reared here in May to September's summer sojourn. I grew to love the North and also to love old things that last, like mahogany boats and pine dough boxes. Maybe the things and the places we touch in the beginning, if we can hold on to them through the years, even over great distances, can comfort and keep us in the end. I think so. From the Proust questionnaire, what is your favorite journey? Along the path between my parents' log cabin and my grandmother Dorothea's summer cottage on Lake Joseph. Down the steps to the pine needle-covered ground, soft and pliant underfoot. There was a boggy patch, usually navigable, but much wetter after a rainfall to be carefully maneuvered. Laced with celery-toned lichen, the path's granite mounds rose and dipped, and serpent slid close to and away from the water's edge on the way to Graham's deck, then porch, then kitchen table. The whole trip only took about 5 minutes. I could do it in 3 at a run. I wish you could see the house emerge through the green pine birch jumble. It was waiting, warm and filled with old rugs, iron pots, and cotton chintz-covered soft landings by picture windows and roaring fires. It was a touchstone, pure of place and unspoiled then. I was a boy once, and when I'm here, I remember the boy best.
Oh, Tommy, that's lovely. Really nice.
That
Really,
was
really nice.
something that I just wrote. Like, I woke up at about 5 o'clock one morning with the sunrise, and I lay there, smelling the air and the pine needles. And it took me back to those summers that I spent at the cottage. We had there was a pack of dogs. The way that my grandparents' cottage was set up was there was a main cottage in the middle, the one that I described. And my grandmother was a designer, an interior designer. So her homes were always incredibly layered with beautiful things that she'd collected from antiques markets and beautiful shops. And her environments were unbelievably welcoming. And she loved to host people and entertain. So that was in the middle. And then my aunts Victoria and Mary had places down on one side, and my parents were down the path on the other side. So it was a family place where, even though everyone lived in different parts of the province during the fall, winter, spring, in the summer everybody was together. So there would be everybody had dogs. So there would be a pack of dogs, like 6 or 7 of them, that would run all the way from one end of the property to the other. Sometimes they would knock over toddlers. Sometimes they would get in a great big jumble and roll and wipe out on the paths and come back covered in their own poops and pine needles and all kinds of things. And we'd have to pull burrs out of them. They were getting into porcupines. It was just a wild and crazy and loud and boisterous, wonderful place to be. And then there were funny things about it too. I remember when I was writing one of the chapters in the book that I'm working on, I was writing about how there was a trampoline that my dad set up at my grandmother's place for the kids to play on. But for some reason, he set the trampoline up and it was surrounded by granite rock. So if you fell off the trampoline, you were dead. It was a total child killer. It was not good. But then there was, a frog pond that as children, my grandmother maintained this frog pond with bulrushes and water lilies filled with frogs that was right next to the lake, but protected by a little stretch of dock so that the waves wouldn't break it up. And as kids, we would catch frogs and we would see tadpoles grow into frogs from the beginning of the summer to the end of the summer. It was just a magical place. Anyway, this summer, that's what I did. I spent a lot of time there. My sister and my mother still maintain homes there that everyone gathers together in during the summer months.
And you all talk together about the good old days?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. And all the people that are now gone that were around in those days. I mean, my Aunt Vicky, we used to go out in that mahogany boat, which is quite a well-known boat on the lakes. It's been long sold to another family because it became, burdensome for us to keep it. And it was just the most beautiful looking thing, all made of mahogany, 37 feet long, just this beautiful thing. And we used to go as a family for sunset cruises, and we'd all pile into this huge, long, beautiful, elegant boat that would slice through the water toward the sunset. And all the adults would be drinking, which is quite illegal now. I don't even know if it was in the 70s, but my Aunt Vicky, when a wave would come, my dad would say, wave. And my Aunt Vicky would be holding her Bloody Mary, and she would say, loose elbow, so that your drink didn't spill. We're just going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
I mean, it's a wonderful thing when summer holidays are traditions and everybody goes back to the country place. And, because I know in Canada and in America, a lot of kids go to camp a lot of the summer.
Oh my gosh, I did.
Yeah. But I think it's those in England, we still don't really have camps because the summer maybe is a bit shorter, school holiday. So people went back. And of course, a lot of boarders, you couldn't send a child who's in boarding school.
No.
Because the middle upper classes went to boarding school and
of course,
from a very young age. And so you couldn't come back, and then go off to camp. It just wasn't in the culture. As long as you were back for tea, it was nobody cared where you were. Nobody playing, we called it rounders or baseball or whatever it is in the street. And then, your mother's one by one calling you in and you're like, no, it's not fair. It's not dark. Yeah, I don't want to go in. But this summer, we really had a superb summer. For a month, all my family came. I've got a lot of friends who are really, family. Poor dishwashers. I mean, I'm lucky I have 2 dishwashers, but both of them are virtually kaput at the moment. It was just constantly feeding people. But I have a friend, Jilly, who was here, and I've known her since I was 4. And our fathers, and that's what was so lovely about memories, because when you do something like that, like you did this summer, going home and talking about the good old days with your family, that's what we were kind of, Jilly and I were doing, because there's nobody left really who remembers. And her father and my father were both very, very handsome, very English looking and tall, and that old fashioned kind of 50s, 60s, style.
Yeah, I'm picturing like old black and white photographs of like handsome British men.
Max looks very much like my father, very much like him. But we used to rent, I don't know if I've told you this before, but we had some cousin who had a bull farm, which was really just a small barn that they'd converted into a house. And it was literally 2 bedrooms upstairs, and downstairs, I don't even remember the kitchen because I probably never went in it, a big old stone fireplace and no bathroom at all. So we used to have, they call it an Elson in England, and it was a chemical toilet, basically. So we had a little hut down in a field where we had the Elson. I hated going in there. But the fathers, the dads, these young dads, I mean, they were in their 30s, would go and then they'd throw it, the chemical slop over this particular wall. And over that wall was billions of nettles. And my mum was very holistic, very unusual for those days. But like, I ate food that, no wonder I'm as strong as an old ox now, never had a slice of white bread. She made everything. So they'd throw this shitty Elson full of chemicals and shit over a wall. And then my mum you see her coming down the path with a large pair of scissors and big gloves on, would cut the nettles and make soup out of it. I think at a very young age, I think I was probably 7 or 8. I was like, really? We're going to eat that? And of course, she didn't complain in those days. You ate what you were given. And then there was no bathroom. And so we would line up all the children and have a cat wash. And she would basically have a big steel tub. And we'd all be there naked going, oh, stop. I've seen it a million times before. Don't be ridiculous, And she would wipe us all down. And then you get dressed. And then upstairs, it was an old slanting roof. And the windows went from the floor up, like about 2 feet. So I remember it was in Wales. It was in Anglesey, which is where Will and Kate, when they got married, that's where they have a house there. They disappeared there. And it's really lovely. It's opposite Ireland, and beautiful island. And so there were 2 bedrooms upstairs under the eaves. One had all the grown-ups in, and one had the children lined up on, basically mattresses on the floor. And all I remember is the giggling going on
Oh
in the
my
other room. So
gosh.
I don't know what those parents were doing. But the funny thing was that there was a constant, my mother screaming, because nobody had told the cows that the bulls were no longer here. So there was 2 doors, like old barn doors that were now doors, but they were always open because we had no air conditioning or anything like that.
Sure, you're trying to get the
And there was
breeze.
always a cow walking through the living room. And it was like, and my mum chasing with a frying pan, like, get out, because the bulls had long gone and the cows were still in the field. So it was very funny. So we taught, we sat, day after day here in the summer. It was very, very hot here this summer, just reminiscing,
About those times.
But I wanted to say, so when you said, somebody sees something, an expression that reminds them of somebody. So something happened to me that was, oh God, it still gives me the chills. We'd gone to the Hamptons, and my brother had rented a house in the Hamptons. This is years and years ago, and my children were about 9 and 10. And my brother is a very handsome man. And
Your brother's quite rakish.
He looks like Sting, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah, he's quite rakish. Like, he's a bit of a ladies' man, isn't he?
Oof. Anyway, so they were all fooling around in the pool, the kids and my brother, because he was very rough and tumble, and stuff. And I was reading my book on a lounger thing, and they were chasing my brother, and my brother had leapt out of the pool running. And now my brother was 6 months old when my father died. And is the spitting image, like the spitting image. And then he was the same age as when my father died. So I was at a very, very rough age, 12, I think. So my brother was in his late 30s. My father had died in his late 30s. I'm reading this book, and my brother is screaming with laughter, running towards me. And I look up from my book, and it was my father.
Wow.
You say ghost?
You just couldn't believe that it wasn't.
But I stood up, and you know how Hans never takes his bloody eyes off me. He's always watching me from somewhere. And I stood up, and I have never in my life fainted. I've always wanted to faint. I've always wanted to be a delicate person who would faint. And I stood up, and it was my father running towards me, laughing. And I passed out.
Wow.
And I nearly cracked my head on the side. Hans got to me just in time, or else I would have split my head open, holiday over. But it's amazing that.
That's so moving.
Yeah,
that's so deeply moving. Like, it's amazing. Isn't it amazing how you can be shaken to your core by something
absolutely.
like that?
That's what it was. I was shaken to my core. Just getting on a happier note. So this summer we got invited to, I have a friend who's a philanthropist, Nico, her son.
Who I have such a crush on. He's so handsome.
Did you see the pictures of that party?
I sure did. Are you kidding?
So we were told where to go. It was about a 300-room villa, now owned by Brazilians, and we all had to wait outside where they served drinks. She arrived in a red Ferrari, driven by one of her workers. I mean, gorgeous. Anyway, they arrived and everybody had drinks. And then these huge doors that were 5 stories high of this medieval villa. I think the biggest villa I have ever seen in my life. And they opened them. Nico went to the front with a glass of champagne. Handsome, tall Nico. Opened these doors. And inside was a courtyard from Elizabethan times. They had dressed it up like it was 1450, 1502 or something like that. With lovely garlands and stuff. And then all these tables and candelabra. And of course, once the sun went down and all these candles came out. And then they had Elizabethan dancers, all in the velvets and the costumes. And they came and danced between the course. It sounds, like, oh God, a bit boring, but it wasn't. It was absolutely amazing. And the flutists, but, so they had all the medieval music and stuff. And it was fantastic. It was just, people came from Mexico and just everywhere. And Elizabethan food, so we had ancient food. And that was a real highlight for me.
I mean, a fancy party in the summer when everyone's sort of dressed up, it's such a lovely, lovely thing to be able to attend. And I think, people who have the means to be able to entertain in that way, it's so nice when they do. because it's just such a treat.
I love parties, and we do a lot of parties. What I like is you're always meeting new people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you invite 40 people here and 80 turn up and like, who's that? They all bring people. And
Of
it's like,
course, because
you're
they've all
from
got
North
people living
Africa.
with them. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's kind of crazy, but one of the most beautiful parties I went to here was some Belgians. And again, you arrive and all the lights going and the candelabra leading you down to the tables, and absolutely beautiful. And I sat between two men, and the first course came, which was some kind of asparagus with shaved truffle. And so I turned to the man on my right and chatting away. And he turned out he owned a vineyard and he was really interesting. And we're chatting and chatting. And then the asparagus plate was taken away. And as they were taking the plates away, it gave me the opportunity to turn to the gentleman on my left. So I said, hello, my name's Debbie. Who are you? Are you from Belgium? And he said, yes, I am. He said, I'm the King of Belgium.
What?
And I thumped him on the arm quite hard. And I said, yeah, sure, I'm the Queen of England. Anyway, honestly, tonight, before we came, we had a sewage outbreak, and he should have seen it. It was so he started telling me a story about La Scala and the opera he'd seen there, and I'm telling him about the damage the sewage has done.
Of course you are.
To our kitchen floor and everything.
Yes.
And then that plate was taken away, and I went to the loo. So as I got up to go to the loo, I bumped into the lady who was having the party, and she said, are you enjoying talking to His Royal Highness? And it was the King of Belgium, and I thumped him and said, yeah, sure, I'm the Queen of England,
I bet he loved it, Debbie. He's probably not always treated like a normal person. It's nice for those.
Polite. He didn't say anything. He didn't, like, oh, what an ignorant, stupid woman.
I think it's nice. I think it's nice that he got treated like a regular guy.
Yeah.
Probably for a change. I'm sure he's used to people being quite sycophantic around him.
Yeah. And I think people like that, they're such gentry. They know how to behave. It's not like a movie star who's like, don't talk to me, and it was really nice. So that was a big highlight. But for me, the summers are about, kind of long, lazy days. And we try and avoid the beach here.
It gets very crowded.
Oh my God.
In the summers. I've seen the photos. I've never been to an Italian beach in the summer, but I've seen the pictures.
If you want to do people watching, you see little Fiat 500s piled. And I've written about, the beach life. And of course, beaches are private, but some are more private than others. Mm-hmm. So they're owned by concessions. So you have these umbrellas and they're all different colors. So one concession is blue and the next is, you've seen pictures of them. They can go for 50 miles. So one might be owned by Omani. So it's like a fortune. You go to the Maldives for a day on that beach. One might be cheap as chips type of thing. I've been years ago where there were like 8 of us went on the beach and the guy said it was like something like 800 euros for 4 beds. There was nobody there. So the beds he gave us were by the rubbish, by the garbage and the toilets. And we're like, well, can we not have the seats by the sea? And it's like, no, because they're owned by generations of families. And so we got 1 bed between like 8 of us. Okay, sure. I'll sit on the sand. So it's a completely different culture. Mm-hmm. So we tend to go in June or September because they're empty because everybody's back at school.
You go in the off season and it's still beautiful. The weather's still lovely.
Exactly. And a lot of the guests have been asking that here. And they're going, well, where are these places? Because all they know about is Amalfi and the Cinque Terre, which are awful. They are so... Europe is having a real problem at the moment with tourists because we don't have enough water.
Oh, yes. This has been in the news quite a bit.
Well, Mallorca, the island of Mallorca, is banning tourists. I mean, it's going to kick them in the face again because they need them, but they have to start... It's not just cruise ships anymore. It's people turning up. So Amalfi now is bordering on a hellhole because everybody thinks that's Italy in the summer. Look at the map of Italy. It's a peninsula.
Yeah.
There are beaches everywhere. Everybody goes to every tour operator. Oh, go to Amalfi. No, do not go to Amalfi and have the worst food. I mean, it's the only time you'll have bad food in Italy, on the Amalfi Coast. And there are so many amazing beaches to go to, but they don't know them. So Italy has over 400 islands you can go to.
Oh, yes. I mean, there's a lot of options.
Yeah, you get ferries over. There are wonderful, wonderful summer places to go, but try and get off the heavy, heavy tourist tracks because we're going to have to. The towns can't take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But did you learn anything this summer?
Do you know what I usually learn during the summer? So in the summer, you get to slow down a little bit. So normally in the summer, I get to cook a little more. So I did learn a few recipes that I really have enjoyed this summer because I spend time cooking on the weekends. I take usually a 4-day weekend most weekends. And I love just puttering around in the kitchen and experimenting with new things. So I do learn a lot about cooking through the summer
What was
months.
your favorite recipe this summer then? What did you cook? Because I tend to find if you have a good recipe and it turns out well, I do it for every party, like in that summer. It's my recipe of that summer.
Well, my recipe of this summer is the most dead simple thing. A tomato toast that Amy Rosen, my friend Amy Rosen, who's a food writer and a chef, taught me how to do this tomato toast that's dead simple. And literally what you do, and this was life-changing for me because I've never done this, is you take fresh, beautiful tomatoes and you grate them on a cheese grater. And when you grate them on the cheese grater, it makes almost like a tomato, like a sludge, basically, but it's a delicious, gorgeous mess. And then you do a good glug of olive oil. I used yours. And a little salt and pepper. And then you leave that and you toast some crusty bread. I use sourdough. And when the toast comes off the grill or out of the toaster, you take a raw clove of garlic and you rub the toast with the garlic. And then you apply the tomato paste and you eat it. And it is so simple and so fast and so delicious. So at the cottage in the summer, sometimes people just come by in the boat and they show up and you haven't got anything to serve them or anything. So somebody runs and gets drinks and beer and brings it to the dock. And I would run up and just start toasting some bread and peel a clove of garlic and grate the tomatoes. And it's ready in under 5 minutes. That was my recipe of the summer.
Mine is actually a recipe out of Francis Mays, who we had on the podcast last. During COVID, she wrote a cookbook called
Pasta veloce.
Pasta veloce. She has a recipe in there, cheap as chips. It's spaghettini. So spaghetti, it's thinner spaghetti. So dry spaghetti.
Like an angel hair almost.
Maybe a little bit thicker than that. A little bit thicker than that.
A little bit.
But so it's lots of grated lemon. So a lot of grating. So we could grate together. You do your tomatoes, I'll do my lemon. So lots of grated lemon, a little bit of onion, and then you won't like this, but some cream. You don't have to use the cream. You put all the lemon in a pan for like 2 minutes. You stir it all up, some grated Parmesan, and then you toss the pasta when it's ready in it, and then you put crushed pistachio nuts on top.
Oof, that sounds gorgeous.
Oh my God, because it's so lemony and such a clean, summery pasta. So that was I did it maybe 5 times this summer, and it was fantastic.
Well, I think we're going to end on that note because now I'm starving. I'm absolutely starving, having talked about all of this. And I happen to have a basket of tomatoes upstairs, as well as a half a loaf of sourdough. So I'm going straight up to make some tomato toast. I don't know what you're doing.
I put an apron on. I've got 18 women in there who have created a synchronized swimming group.
Okay.
God knows what. I can hear the laughing from here.
Put on your bathing cap and off you go to jump in the pool and join the routine.
Yeah.
I'm glad you had a beautiful summer, Debbie.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please rate us, send in a review, and make sure you're subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This podcast is distributed by the Women in Media Podcast Network. Find out more at womeninmedia.network.